Most men don't realize it, but there's a silent disease running through almost every relationship in their lives. A behavior so subtle it feels polite, even respectful. The compulsion to explain yourself. You think you're being considerate when you justify why you're late, why you're tired, why you said no. You tell yourself it's empathy. But the truth is darker. This constant need to explain isn't about courtesy, it's about fear. Carl Jung saw it for what it is, a wound, a scar formed in childhood when your feelings weren't taken seriously. When you heard, "Don't be dramatic. Stop exaggerating." There's no reason to feel that way. Each dismissal carved a message into you. What I feel only matters if others approve. And that belief followed you into adulthood like chains. You learned to convince others before you could believe yourself. Every explanation became an invisible bargain. If I make you understand, maybe you won't judge me. Maybe you won't leave me. Maybe I'll still belong. But here's the cost. You sacrifice your own authority. You stop acting because it feels true and start acting because it sounds acceptable. You no longer feel freely. You rationalize your emotions so they don't offend. Slowly, you stop living for yourself and start living for an audience. And the crowd always demands more. Jung called this the enemy of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Because as long as you need to explain yourself, you are still bowing. You are still asking for permission to exist. And every justification is a whispered confession. I am only valid if you allow it. That's why compulsive explanation isn't harmless. It's submission. The man who constantly explains himself is not respected, he is tolerated. His words don't carry weight because they're always half apologies. His presence doesn't demand space because he's too busy asking for it. And this is where the transformation begins. When you stop explaining yourself, something shifts. The psyche, once bent under the pressure of being understood, rises. Silence replaces justification. Presence replaces argument. And for the first time, you taste what Jung called internal authority, the unshakable conviction that you don't need anyone's permission to be. This is what we're going to uncover in this video. Why you explain yourself, why it destroys you, and what happens when you finally choose silence. Because the day you stop justifying your existence is the day everything changes. Your relationships, your energy, your power. And here's the truth. Explaining yourself is not empathy. It's the behavior of a man who has forgotten that his existence was already justified the moment he was born. So let's begin. Behind the need to explain yourself lies something much deeper than courtesy. It's not about being polite. It's about a psychic wound that goes back to childhood. Think about it. As a boy, when you cried, were you told to man up? When you showed anger, did they call you difficult or disrespectful? When you admitted fear, did they laugh at you, dismiss you, or shame you? Those moments left scars. They taught you one brutal lesson. What I feel is wrong. I can only trust what others approve of. So you adapted. You learned that if you explained yourself well enough, if you made your reasons sound logical, you might avoid punishment, mockery, or rejection. And slowly, you built a prison. One where every thought, every feeling, every decision had to pass through someone else's filter before it could be real. By the time you became an adult, this pattern was invisible. You didn't even notice it anymore. You thought you were being clear, thoughtful, reasonable. But in reality, every explanation was a hidden plea. Don't leave me. Don't hate me. Don't reject me for being who I am. Carl Jung called this self-abandonment. It's the moment you trade your truth for approval. And it's not loud. It doesn't break you in one dramatic instant. It erodes you quietly, like water dripping on stone. Every time you laugh when something isn't funny. Every time you say yes when you wanted to say no. Every time you call your sadness tiredness, or disguise your anger as logic so you won't look immature. Piece by piece, you betray yourself. And here's the cruel twist. society rewards it. People praise those who are easygoing, those who don't make drama, those who get along. But behind the praise is exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who has bent himself so much for others that he no longer knows his own shape. Jung saw this as one of the roots of neurosis. When your ego, the surface part of your mind, serves only external approval, it disconnects from the self, the deeper center of your being. That's when anxiety spikes. That's when you feel lost, indecisive, restless. Not because life is too complicated, but because your soul has been silenced for too long. And this is the turning point, the recognition that every compulsive explanation is self-betrayal. Every time you shape your truth so others will accept it, you abandon yourself. And the more you abandon yourself, the weaker you become. So ask yourself, whose life are you living? As long as your every move is explained to avoid rejection, you are not living your life. You're playing a role in someone else's play. The first step toward freedom is brutal honesty. Recognize the pattern, see the wound for what it is, and accept this. Your emotions do not need to be justified to deserve space. They are not wrong. They are not invalid. They simply are. But here comes the challenge. When you stop explaining yourself, the silence that follows will feel unbearable, because it will expose the emptiness left by years of dependence on others' approval. That discomfort isn't a sign you're wrong. It's the proof that you're finally facing the truth. Jung called this the beginning of internal authority, the moment you stop outsourcing your worth and begin to reclaim it from within. This is where individuation truly begins. Compulsive explanation isn't just a nervous habit, it's a slow, corrosive betrayal. Each time you reshape your words to sound acceptable, each time you mask your feelings to avoid judgment, each time you justify your choices to appear reasonable, you chip away at your core. Jung was ruthless in pointing this out. The ego, the conscious self, was never meant to be a slave to external approval. Its true role is to organize your life around the self, the deeper center of your being. But when the ego becomes addicted to pleasing others, it turns traitor. It stops serving you and starts serving them. And what does that create? Doubt, anxiety, a constant inner hum of insecurity. You second-guess your own instincts. You silence your anger, dismiss your sadness, bury your joy, because you've been conditioned to think none of it is valid unless someone else approves. This is why so many men today feel hollow. They've been praised for being reasonable, polite, adaptable, but the price of that praise is heavy. Exhaustion, loss of direction, the crushing sense that they're living someone else's life. Jung understood that this fragmentation of the self is one of the main causes of neurosis. When you're too far from your own truth, symptoms appear: chronic anxiety, emptiness, indecision, low self-esteem. Not because you're weak, but because your soul has been gagged. And here's the most brutal part. Society applauds the very behaviors that destroy you. They love the man who explains himself, who bends, who avoids conflict. But behind the applause is a man who no longer knows what he wants. So let me ask you, whose approval are you still chasing? Your parents? Your partner? Your boss? Your friends? How many decisions in your life, your studies, your job, even the people you keep close, were shaped not by conviction, but by the hidden need to be understood? Every time you yield for acceptance, you amputate a piece of yourself. And the sum of those amputations is what you call adulthood. But strip away the masks, and what's left? A man half alive. The way out begins with reclaiming internal authority. To stop asking, will they understand? And start saying, it doesn't matter if they understand. This is true for me. That shift is not intellectual, it's existential. It changes the very axis of your psyche. You stop orbiting around other people's opinions and return to the gravity of your own center. But don't expect applause. The moment you stop explaining yourself, some people will feel threatened. Manipulators will panic. Those who fed on your insecurity will start to lose control. Relationships built on your submission will begin to crumble. And that's exactly the point. Your silence, born from authority, is not weakness, it's rebellion. Not the noisy rebellion of a boy screaming to be heard, but the quiet, immovable stance of a man who no longer negotiates his existence. That silence is a wall. It doesn't react, it doesn't plead, it doesn't explain. And against it, manipulation breaks. This is why, when you stop explaining yourself, everything changes. Because you've withdrawn the fuel from the very system that enslaved you. The next step is learning to endure the anxiety that comes with silence. The urge to justify will scream inside you. The old patterns will beg for one more explanation. But if you hold the line, something remarkable happens. Silence transforms from emptiness into presence, and presence commands respect without ever asking for it. Silence, when it comes from strength, is one of the most disruptive forces in human psychology. Jung understood this with brutal clarity. When a man stops explaining himself, he isn't just avoiding arguments. He is dismantling an entire system of control that once fed on his insecurity. For people who depended on your explanations, partners who guilted you, bosses who manipulated you, friends who pressured you, your silence will feel like rebellion. And it is. Not the rebellion of noise and tantrums, but of stillness and immovability. It says, I owe no one a reason to exist. This kind of silence terrifies manipulators. Emotional control only works when there is visible vulnerability, when you're afraid of being misunderstood, when you're desperate not to disappoint. Take that fear away, and the entire game collapses. And this is where your relationships start to change. The ones built on power imbalances begin to fall apart. Because silence, when anchored in authority, works as a filter. It reveals who was truly with you and who was only there because you were easy to bend. Jung wrote that individuation, the process of becoming whole, often requires rupture. This is one of those ruptures. People will drift away. Some will attack, sensing they're losing control. Others will distance themselves because your presence, once compliant, now unsettles them. But don't mistake this for loss. It is liberation. Because when you stop explaining your boundaries, your emotions, your decisions, you begin to attract relationships built on mutual respect, not dependence. Still, the most dangerous enemy is not outside. It's inside. The compulsion to explain yourself is deeply ingrained. When you first resist it, your own mind will rebel. The silence will feel unbearable. You'll want to break it, to justify yourself just once more, to ease the tension. This is where silence becomes a spiritual exercise, to remain whole even in discomfort, to train the psyche to sit in the storm of not being understood and not flinch. That silence is not absence, it is presence. It is you refusing to put your identity on trial. And the longer you hold it, the more it transforms into authority. Authority that doesn't shout, authority that doesn't beg, authority that simply is. And here's the shift. Once you taste this presence, you will see how much of your life was wasted feeding the explanations others demanded. You'll realize that all along, you weren't protecting the relationship. You were protecting their control over you. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop being predictable. You stop being easy to control. And those who thrived on your submission will no longer know what to do with you. But you, finally, you will know what to do with yourself. When a man stops explaining himself, the world shifts. It's as if your energy changes frequency. You no longer emit, "Please understand me." You radiate, "I know who I am, and I don't need your permission," and the world cannot ignore it. Jung knew the psyche responds not to words, but to energy. A man who constantly justifies himself transmits submission, but the man who no longer explains radiates clarity, weight, and presence. This isn't arrogance, it's integrity. The moment you stop asking for validation, you begin to live from your center. And that center is unshakable. People will treat you differently. The weak will fall away. The manipulators will wither. But those capable of genuine respect will step forward, because respect always begins within. And here's the paradox. The less you seek approval, the more respect you command. Why? Because integrity carries gravity. It bends the space around you. Without raising your voice, without defending yourself, without a single word, people feel it. You no longer beg for space. You occupy it. You no longer react out of insecurity. You act out of alignment. And this is why, when you stop explaining yourself, everything in your life, relationships, career, purpose, reorganizes itself around your new stance. But let me warn you, the impulse to explain won't vanish overnight. It will return, whispering that it's safer to please, easier to justify, less risky to yield. In those moments, remember, every explanation you silence is a brick in the fortress of your integrity. Every silence you endure is proof that you belong to yourself. And that's the ultimate shift. You stop living to be understood and start living to be true. So ask yourself, what's the explanation you give most often? The one you know you don't want to give anymore. Write it down. Name it. Because the moment you refuse to repeat it, your transformation begins. And if this message hit you, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with the man who still explains too much. Subscribe if you want more truths that the world won't hand you, because here we don't soothe illusions, we shatter them. The journey doesn't end here. The next step awaits. Watch our next video and continue building the kind of presence no one can ignore. Because in the end, the world only respects the man who respects himself.